Hey there. I hope you and your loved ones are doing well today, truly, because what I'm about to share with you is not just a story, it's a mirror, a wake-up call, and maybe, just maybe, a reason to keep believing that justice is still possible, even when the system tries to crush you. You ever walked into a room and felt every single eye cut into you like you didn't belong? That's exactly how Leona Brooks felt that morning. But little did anyone know, that woman walking into that local Georgia courtroom wasn't just any woman. She was a federal prosecutor, and she was about to make history. Let's rewind. The morning sunlight spilled through the blinds of Leona's small but warm apartment in downtown Atlanta. At 36, she was a force, razor sharp, fiercely composed, and deeply respected in the federal legal circuit. Her name carried weight in Washington circles. But that day, she wasn't stepping into her usual marble-walled courtroom. Numbered that day, she had a personal fight to win. It was about land, not just any land, a small plot passed down from her late Uncle Clyde, a piece of soil soaked in family history, in memories, in legacy. As she stood in front of her mirror, she reached for a crisp white blouse, dark trousers, and a light gray blazer. Understated, intentional, powerful. She tied her natural hair neatly back, glanced once at her reflection, and said to herself quietly, "Just a simple day, right?" But in her eyes, that quiet fire, that readiness to fight, even for the small things, because small things to Leona were never truly small when they carried truth. At 7:45 a.m., coffee in hand, she sat down at her kitchen table. Her phone buzzed. It was Candace, her longtime assistant. "Leona, sorry to bother you this early, but I just got wind that Everett Collins may have gotten to the judge." Leona's face hardened. Everett Collins. A local real estate mogul with a toxic smile and an ego the size of Texas. Her opponent in the land dispute, and a man who believed that money could bend laws like paper. "Let him try," Leona said coldly. "Today, he's going to learn that justice doesn't come with a price tag." When Leona arrived at the county courthouse, it was like stepping into another world, a far cry from the grand halls of federal justice. This was cramped, dim, and filled with stale air and old tension. But what caught her wasn't the space, it was the stares. Some smirked, others whispered, "Who does she think she is? Probably here to cause trouble. Walks in like she owns the place." A white woman with tight lips leaned toward the man beside her and hissed, "People like her, they always think they can beat the system." Leona didn't flinch. This wasn't her first dance with prejudice, and it wouldn't be her last. The courtroom was packed, mostly minor cases, unpaid tickets, petty disputes, the usual. But the tension shifted the moment Everett Collins strutted in, custom suit, gold cufflinks, that smirk you only wear when you believe the world belongs to you. "Well, well," he said smugly as he passed by Leona's table. "Cutting it close, aren't we?" Leona calmly placed her briefcase down. No words, just a look that said, "Try me, I dare you." Judge Richard Whitmore entered shortly after. Gray hair, hard eyes, local legend, known to be old school, very old school. "Let's begin," he said, without much ceremony. Everett was called first. His tone was smooth, his words rehearsed. "This land, Your Honor, has been in my family for decades. Miss Brooks, with all due respect, is attempting to claim something that never belonged to her." He painted a picture of noble family ties and quiet tradition, none of which were backed by a single document. But Judge Whitmore nodded along anyway, even threw him a few softball follow-up questions. "Thank you, Mr. Collins," the judge said. "Very compelling." Leona's fists tightened under the table. Her turn. She stood, calm, measured. Your Honor, I've brought my uncle's will, property tax records, and original deed filings. All confirm our family's legal ownership. Miss Brooks, the judge cut in, I suggest you get to the point. We're not here for a speech. The interruption stung, but Leona didn't break. She breathed, adjusted, pushed forward, only to be cut off again moments later. I've reviewed your documents, Judge Whitmore said with finality. They seem insufficient. Silence, no murmurs, no coughs, just eyes, watching, waiting. Everett leaned toward her as he passed her table again and whispered, "Women like you. You don't win in rooms like this, not here, not today." Leona didn't blink. She straightened her shoulders and slowly stood. Her heart pounded, but her voice was ice. The room was still, the kind of stillness that follows a slap no one saw coming. Leona stood, hands resting lightly on the table, her blazer collar crisp, her chin just slightly raised. But her eyes were fire. "Your Honor," she said slowly, clearly, "before I continue presenting evidence, I feel compelled to point out a concern." Judge Whitmore shifted in his seat, his fingers tapping once on the bench. "If it doesn't pertain directly to the facts, I suggest we move on." "I agree," Leona said, and then smiled, razor sharp. "Time is valuable, which is why I'm curious why Mr. Collins was allowed to speak uninterrupted for 12 minutes, but I've been cut off twice within 3. You could almost hear the air change. Murmurs rippled like wind through wheat. Heads turned, a few mouths dropped open. One older black man in the back, gray cap in hand, nodded slowly, knowingly. Judge Whitmore stiffened. "And what exactly are you suggesting, Ms. Brooks?" he asked, voice clipped. "I'm not suggesting," Leona replied, her tone calm but laced with steel. "I'm reminding this courtroom that equal time, equal treatment, and equal respect are not favors, they're rights." Silence followed, heavy and loaded. Then she returned to her documents, calm, surgical. She presented the notarized land survey, her uncle's handwritten will, tax receipts dating back 15 years, all in her family's name. The final blow? A certified statement from the County Land Commission explicitly denying any historical ownership claims from the Collins family. Leona slid the stack across the table. "These aren't opinions," she said. "These are facts." Across the room, Everett Collins shifted, his confident grin faltering for the first time. His fingers fidgeted with his expensive pen. His knee bounced. Judge Whitmore picked up the documents and began to scan. The seconds dragged like hours. He cleared his throat, then again, this time with more discomfort than command. "You've presented a strong case, Ms. Brooks," he finally said. "However, I still find Mr. Collins's claims more persuasive." A long pause. Leona didn't flinch. Instead, she reached into her bag, quiet, deliberate, and pulled out a small leather case. She opened it, revealing the gleam of a federal badge. "I am Leona Brooks," she said, holding it up so every eye in the courtroom could see. "Federal prosecutor for the Northern District of Georgia." Gasps, audible ones. Even the clerk froze. Everett paled, slumping slightly in his chair. The color drained from his face like spilled coffee soaking into white carpet. Judge Whitmore stared, mouth slightly ajar. Leona continued, voice unwavering. "And while I'm not here today in my official capacity, I will not ignore the clear signs of bias that have tainted these proceedings. When justice is bent by power or prejudice, we all lose." A deep hush fell, the kind of hush that holds shame. Judge Whitmore blinked, twice. I believe a recess is in order to thoroughly review the documents." Of course, Leona didn't gloat. She didn't need to. She gave a small nod and quietly returned to her seat. As the judge rose and exited, the courtroom buzzed with low voices, whispers of admiration, of shock, of awakening. Across the room, Everett Collins sat like a deflated balloon, puffed up pride leaking slowly from his shoulders. A woman in the front row, mid-50s, natural gray curls, gave Leona a slow, respectful nod. The court reconvened 30 minutes later, and this time it was different. Judge Whitmore's tone was even. His eyes avoided Leona's. After careful review of all presented materials, he said, voice dry and stiff, "This court rules in favor of Ms. Brooks. The property in question is rightfully hers, case closed." Murmurs again. This time, not confusion, not contempt, just respect. Leona sat still. No visible celebration, just a quiet exhale. "But Everett," he exploded. "This is outrageous," he barked, leaping from his seat. "She used her badge to intimidate the court. This isn't justice, it's manipulation." Judge Whitmore's eyes turned cold. "Mr. Collins, I strongly suggest you sit down before I hold you in contempt." Everett hesitated, seething, but he knew the game was over, and he had lost. As the room emptied, Leona gathered her files calmly. Everett passed her one last time, this time no smirk. "You think this is over?" he hissed. "You've disgraced the system." Leona didn't even look up. "I didn't disgrace the system," she said, voice like stone. "I held it accountable." He stared a beat longer, then stormed off. A defeated man in an expensive suit. Leona allowed herself a half smile. Just a flicker, one case down. But this wasn't the end, not even close. 3 days after the trial, Leona Brooks sat quietly in her office, sipping coffee from a chipped mug that had seen her through hundreds of early mornings and late nights. She wasn't celebrating, not yet, because she knew when you challenge a system, the real work starts after the courtroom clears. The phones at the federal prosecutor's office hadn't stopped ringing. Journalists, lawyers, law students, civil rights activists, they all wanted to talk about what happened in that tiny courthouse, especially the moment Leona had calmly, boldly lifted her badge and exposed what so many had felt for years but couldn't prove, that justice wasn't blind. It was biased. Headlines exploded across local and national media. Federal prosecutor exposes racial bias in small-town courtroom. Justice or just us. Georgia judge accused of favoritism. She showed them her badge and showed the nation the truth. News anchors replayed the courtroom footage again and again, especially the part where Judge Richard Whitmore visibly froze as Leona presented her credentials. Her words, "I held it accountable case," became a rallying cry online. Social media turned it into a hashtag, a meme, a movement. Held it accountable, justice, for all. We see you, Judge. But the story didn't end there. Within a week, other people started to come forward. A Black man recounted how he was fined twice the standard amount for a traffic violation in Whitmore's court. A Latina woman spoke of being cut off 5 times during her case, while her white opponent was allowed to speak uninterrupted. A veteran defense attorney, white and nearing retirement, confessed in a shaky voice, "I've seen it. I've ignored it, but not anymore." Soon, the Judicial Ethics Committee launched an official investigation, and what they uncovered, it was devastating. 80% of defendants of color in Judge Whitmore's courtroom had received harsher penalties than their white counterparts. White defendants were often given expedited hearings and lighter sentences. Attorneys of color were routinely interrupted, rushed, or dismissed. And worst of all, emails. Private communications between Whitmore and Everett Collins, proof of collusion. the city erupted. Protests outside the courthouse, legal scholars condemning the pattern, petitioners demanding accountability. 2 months later, Judge Richard Whitmore resigned in disgrace, avoiding formal charges, but not public condemnation. His name became synonymous with the very thing Leona had stood against, injustice hiding in plain sight. Meanwhile, Leona kept her head down. No press tour, no book deal. But the change, it spread like wildfire. Her story sparked nationwide legal reform conversations. Georgia rolled out mandatory implicit bias training for judges, clerks, and attorneys. A new judicial oversight commission was formed, diverse, transparent, with community seats. Other states took notice, other prosecutors stood taller, and Leona, she became more than a lawyer. She became a symbol, a speaker, a mentor, a truth teller. At Howard University, her alma mater, she stood before a packed auditorium of aspiring Black lawyers, her voice calm, her tone humble. "Justice isn't automatic," she said. "It's not a machine you turn on and trust. It's people, and people can fail, which is why we have to stay awake, speak up, show up, even when it costs us something." The applause? It didn't stop for 2 full minutes, and somewhere in that crowd, a 16-year-old girl, pen in hand, hope in her chest, whispered, "That's who I want to be." 3 months later, a report came out. Disparities in local court rulings had dropped by 40%. Bias complaints were down. Community trust was rebuilding. And in Leona's quiet corner office in Atlanta, one thing stood out on her wall, a tiny frame. Inside it, a wrinkled $500 receipt, the fine from the day she'd stood before Judge Whitmore and fought for her land. When a journalist asked about it, she smiled. "It reminds me," she said softly, "that even small moments can spark something bigger." One day, Leona opened a letter, handwritten, sloppy spelling, but powerful. "Ms. Brooks, you made me feel brave. I'm 14, and I want to be a lawyer now, too. Because of you, I believe I can fight back." She folded it slowly, closed her eyes, and for the first time since the trial, she let a single tear fall, not from pain, but from knowing she'd done something that mattered. Let's talk truth. When it's all said and done, what happened in that courtroom wasn't just about a piece of land. It was about power, prejudice, and whether justice still means something when no one's watching. So now that you've seen how it ended, let's ask the hard questions. Was Judge Whitmore wrong? Absolutely, but not just because he misjudged the evidence. He judged Leona Brooks before she even opened her mouth. Because she was a Black woman. Because she didn't walk in with a familiar last name or a good old boy's handshake. Because he didn't expect her to be smarter, better prepared, or braver than the man sitting across from her. His actions weren't just a lapse in judgment. They were a reflection of a mindset, one that had rotted quietly for decades inside that courtroom. And Everett Collins, he didn't just lie. He relied on the lie, the system's lie, that people like him don't need evidence when they have money, charm, and the right skin tone. He knew the deck was stacked, and he was shocked when someone turned the table over. But here's where it gets deeper. Why did they act the way they did? Judge Whitmore wasn't born a villain. He was born into a system that rewarded quiet bias and punished accountability. A system that whispered, "You're the law. You get to decide what's fair." Everett Collins wasn't just arrogant. He had been taught and rewarded for bending rules, charming officials, and walking over people who didn't come from his world. To him, Leona's resistance wasn't just surprising, it was offensive. But the most important part of this story, Leona didn't fight back with anger. She fought back with evidence, composure, and truth. And when that wasn't enough, she showed them her badge, not to flex power, but to remind the room that she wasn't just someone's niece in a land dispute. She was a woman who had worked her whole life for justice, and she wasn't going to sit quietly while someone tried to erase her family's legacy. The lesson? It's simple and hard. Justice doesn't work on autopilot. It demands people who are awake, brave, and willing to speak when others stay silent. Systems don't change because they're exposed. They change because people refuse to walk away once they've seen the truth. And silence is never neutral. Every time someone like Leona speaks up, the silence around them breaks, and the truth gets a little louder. So now I want to leave you with this. Leona didn't just win a case, she ignited a movement. She proved that one woman standing firm in her truth can make a judge resign, a community wake up, and a country take notice. She didn't disgrace the system. She saved it by forcing it to look in the mirror. Have you ever felt judged before you spoke? Ever watched someone get treated unfairly and wondered if you should say something? Tell us in the comments. Your voice might be the spark someone else needs. And if Leona Brooks inspired you today, if her courage made you feel just a little braver, then please like this video, share it with someone who believes in justice, and subscribe to our channel, Black Women, where we tell the stories they tried to silence. Because we're not silent anymore, and neither are you.